Well, I just want to say thank you so much, Pastor, for having me. Thank you for inviting me to come and serve your congregation. Thank you, congregation, for showing up. You didn't have to come tonight, and I'm sure that there are things that are, much more tasty in your life that you could have gone to, you could have attended, but something in you called you to this space for this weekend, and I believe that it's God. I believe that God has called you in order to give you a gift. And I come bearing gifts that I myself received. The end of chapter 1 in my book, The Very Good Gospel, ends with a memory of my pastor in Los Angeles. He used to end every sermon, it seemed, with this one saying that he would say. He would say, "I'm just a beggar who's been searching for food. And I've come today to share with other beggars where I have found some." So that is how I'd like to open our time tonight, is with the understanding that we are all simply beggars. We are all simply trying to find good morsels to eat, food to nourish us, grow us, and bring our spirits alive, bring our souls alive, to connect us with God, each other, and the world. And so tonight, we're going to be talking about 4 words that change everything. And these 4 words are words that have come to me from the very first chapter of the whole Bible in the book of Genesis. I learned them about 20 years ago now, and 18 years ago to be exact. And when I did, I had no idea really the impact that they were going to have on my life, but they literally did change everything. So about 18 years ago, in the year 2003, I took a pilgrimage. And that pilgrimage was through 2 major stories that happened on American soil. The story of the Cherokee Trail of Tears. That's that story that began with President Andrew Jackson ordering the removal of the 5 major civilized, quote, civilized tribes of the Southeast. And that removal happened really over the course of almost a decade. And he did not have the right. The Supreme Court had actually said no, especially for the Cherokee have the right to that land. But Andrew Jackson said back, well, to his cabinet, well, the Supreme Court, has the law, but I have the military, I have the army. So who's going to win? So he called the army to go down into Georgia and round up Cherokee people and march them 800 miles in snow. 16,000 people marched, 4,000 died. Women were raped along the way. People escaped and were disconnected from their families forevermore. Our own family oral history has told us that some of our ancestors walked that trail of tears. And so for me, that journey back in 2003 was very personal. And then we got to the end of the Trail of Tears. We got to Oklahoma. We took a little bit of a break, and then we started our second journey. These were 2 weeks at a time. The next 2 weeks were spent in the deep South, and they were retracing the experience of Africans in America from slavery through civil rights. And in that journey, we started out in Little Rock, where we saw the Little Rock Nine, the place where they were jeered by people who did not want their schools to be desegregated. We went up into Memphis and went to the Civil Rights Museum there and stood at the door where Dr. King died. And we ended actually at the Martin Luther King Jr., the museum in Atlanta. And the whole way, after having ridden for 4 weeks now through the most heinous stories on American soil, the stories of genocide and enslavement, I was baffled when I asked myself a very challenging question. The question went like this: My third great grandmother, her name was Leah Ballard, and she was enslaved in South Carolina, Camden, South Carolina. She had 17 children, most likely because she was what they called a breeder. Her job on the plantation that she did not get paid for was to breed money for her master. And I imagined myself at the end of this journey going and knocking on my third great grandmother's door and saying, "Great great great grandma Leah, I have good news for you," and sharing with her my articulation, the articulation of the good news of the gospel that I had received in college and church. It was very simple. It was, God loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life, but you are sinful and therefore you are separated from God. But Jesus died to pay the penalty for your sin. And so all you have to do is to pray this prayer at the back of the gold booklet that I have for you, and you get to go to heaven. And I imagined what Leah, how she would respond. I imagined, would this make Leah jump and shout for joy? And the answer was simple. It was no. When I was really gut level honest with myself, I had to say no. In fact, if Leah had been living in the 1980s, she might have said to me, "Are you smoking crack? Do you not see me? Do you not see me?" So I got home and I entered into 1 year of depression. Because you see, for me, the gospel was the center of my whole worldview. It was the center of my life. I had shaped my whole life around this understanding of Jesus as my savior. So what now if the good news of the gospel, as I understood it, was not good enough for my own third great grandmother? If it's not good enough for those who need good news the most, then maybe it's not Jesus's good news. So, depression and searching. I engaged in a period of 13 years of swimming in Genesis. Genesis became my best friend. And why Genesis? Because we were introduced in the orientation to that pilgrimage to this biblical concept called shalom. Shalom is the presence of love and trust and truth-telling and justice and reciprocity and repair, all of the good things. But I wanted to know more. I wanted to understand it fully. So I began to investigate in Genesis 1. And so this talk, this conversation we're going to have tonight, it stems out of Genesis 1. So let's dive in. The first of the 4 words is tov me'od. Tov me'od. Now, it's actually a phrase. It is the phrase very good. And so if you have your Bible, you can actually find it if you don't have it yet. In the very last verse of Genesis 1:31, it reads, "God saw everything that God had made, and indeed it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the 6th day." And so those words, very good, are tov me'od. Now, the thing about tov me'od is that it's interesting. Tov means good. Me'od means very. Now, the way that the Hebrews would have understood tov, though, is that it's not necessarily located inside the thing. So the way that the Greeks understood goodness was that goodness is located inside the thing. The project of the Greeks was to find the perfectly level floor, to be the perfect person, to make the perfect podium, per se, right? But that's not how the Hebrews thought of goodness. The Hebrews thought of goodness as living between things. Between things, that makes all the difference. So, and that word me'od, it's not just, that's really good. Actually, me'od means forcefully good. It means radically good. It means overwhelmingly good. It means crazy, crazy, crazy good. So when you look back earlier in the same text in Genesis 1, when God looks around at the end and says, this is very good, what God is talking about is all of the relationships that God had just created. In that text, he's talking about the relationship between humans and God is tov me'od. The relationship between males and females and all genders is tov me'od. And the relationship between all humanity and the rest of creation is tov me'od. No whales needed to be saved on that day because our relationship, our relatedness with God and with all was radically good. And the relationship between humanity and all of creation and the way things work, the systems that govern us, was tov me'od. That's what God is concerned about. That's what God calls good. That's what God calls perfect. It is the perfect relationships between all that God created and God's self. Now, if you go back a little bit earlier in the text, you actually see, now, what does this look like? What does this tov me'od look like? It looks like at the pinnacle of this text in Genesis 1:26, you see it says, then God said, let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the air and over the cattle and over all the wild animals of the earth and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. And so God created humankind in God's image. In the image of God, God created them, male and female. God created them. So here you see the three other words that I want to bring out in the text. And the next word is the word shalom. It is the word image. So it says, then God said, let us make humankind in our image. It actually says in our shalom. What does shalom mean? Well, shalom literally means representative figure. So it's the representative figure of the king or the queen in the kingdom, in the empire. It is the image of the king on the coin that goes all over the empire, so that everybody knows that Caesar rules here. Everybody knows that Pharaoh rules here. It is the bust at the entrance of the city of the king to let them know the king rules here. Well, we are made in the shalom of God. Take that in for a minute. Have you ever thought of that? Because you see, the shalom is supposed to be a marker of where the king rules. Maybe the first question here is, are you a marker of where God rules? There's another thing about this word shalom. You see, the Greek version of it is the word icon. And Jesus uses that word icon in the New Testament when he's in the temple and he's being, harassed actually by the Pharisees, Sadducees, and scribes. They're trying to entrap him. And they come up to him and they say, yo, Jesus, by the way, I live in Philly. I'm in Philly right now. I live here. I'm from Philly. And everybody in Philly, like, yo is the thing. So everybody in the Bible, in my book, is from Philly. So there you go. So Jesus is in the temple and they're like, yo, Jesus, Caesar wants to tax us, so are taxes okay? Should we be paying taxes? And there you go. And so here we are. Now I can see you all. You can't see my presentation anymore. Not sure how that happened. But So Jesus says, Jesus says, well, show me a coin. What do you see? And they say, we see Caesar, the icon of Caesar. Okay. That's basically the word shalom. And he says, okay, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, but give to God what belongs to God. Well, what belongs to God? We do. We belong to God because we bear the shalom of God. Humans bear the icon of God. And what Jesus was saying there, it was not just some random statement. You see, at the time, the Pharisees had been pushing an understanding of holiness that said that they had to go along with the laws, the way that Caesar did his politics. In order for them to be holy, they had to practice the Roman law as perfectly as they practiced the Jewish law. That equaled holiness. But that's not holiness. And in fact, the way that the tax system had been made, the taxes were not too high, but the way that the system worked, the way the structure worked, it was actually bilking the people so that they were impoverished, because it wasn't only the Roman tax they had to pay. They also had to pay the temple tax. And on top of that, they had to pay the tax collectors, extra tax that the tax collector came. So when Jesus came into Jerusalem, when he was growing up in an area that was colonized, that had no agency, and that was impoverished. It was regular practice for Caesar's centurions and for his soldiers to roll through the streets and to toss bread to the crowds. And they would take it because they had to, because they were hungry. Shalom. The next word is the word rada, or rada. Rada is the word dominion. That is the word that Jesus uses, that is used in a text when it says, and let them have dominion. So this word dominion is sorely misunderstood for millennia. It's been misunderstood. Some people have said that dominion is what it means to dominate, even unto obliteration. But that's not what this word means in this text. In this text, dominion, actually, there's 8 different ways to say dominion in Genesis. And I counted them. And this one literally means to tread down, to tread down. Now that feels violent, doesn't it? It feels kind of violent. I understand why people can get this kind of twisted, but it is the context matters. It is the context of the very beginning of the untamed wilderness where vegetation is growing up all over the place. And the treading down is the maintaining the boundaries of, maintaining the wellness of the relatedness between all of God's creation. So it's actually more akin to stewardship. All humanity is created to steward the world, to maintain the boundaries, to maintain the wellness of all the relatedness. If you look in Genesis 2, you'll actually see an even clearer picture of dominion. That clearer picture of dominion tells us, it says in Genesis 2, that God took the human and placed the human in the middle of the garden and said, till and keep it. Now, do you know what till and keep mean when you translate them from the Hebrew? They mean serve and protect. Hello, somebody. So dominion, what it looks like to exercise dominion is to serve creation, is to protect creation, is to cultivate creation. It is not to dominate creation, and certainly not to dominate other human beings who were created in the image of God with the call to exercise dominion. So there are some implications here. Now I'm going to need to get to share my screen again. I'm going to go back. Okay. I don't know if I'm the host. Am I the host? I'm not the host. So somehow I have the ability to make this change. Okay. So let's see if I can do this. Aha, there we are. Okay. So going back. So that was Rada. So Rada was dominion. And now the implications. The first implication is that very goodness is about the radical wellness of all the relationships in creation. The second implication is that to be human equals to be made in the image of God. The third implication is that if you are made in the image of God, then you are also divinely called by God to exercise stewardship of the world. Now, friends, then you have the two trees. You have the fall. And with the fall, you have humanity making a choice to go against God, making a choice that we don't really need God, making a choice that we know better than God. God said, don't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Oh, but it looks like it's good for food. And you know, the old geezer doesn't want us to be equal to God. So let's go ahead and eat. And what happens? What happens is the destruction of all of the relationships that God just a chapter and a verse ago declared tov me'od. The first thing to go is our relationship with self. Shame enters the world on that day. The second thing to go is the relationship between us and God. You could actually think you could say it broke when we disobeyed. That's debatable. The next thing to go is our relationship between genders. Men now dominate women as a natural consequence of coming out from under the shalom, the umbrella of God's shalom. This is what it looks like when we come out from under that umbrella. It looks like domination. Then humans dominate the earth. We have to beat the earth to get anything out of it. And the very first sniping of a snake, of an animal at a human being happens after the fall. It's a fallen state. And then God, through God's grace, God covers over our shame by ripping in half one of God's own creation in order to give us an animal skin to cover over our shame. So death enters the world. And then we are driven from the garden. And I don't know about you, but I would have to be driven from paradise as well. And it doesn't end there. The next chapter, you have Cain rising up to dominate Abel. And then you have Lamech with his two wives, dominating his two wives. One's name is Shadow and the other's name is Adornment. And then a few chapters later, you have the first confusion of languages with the Tower of Babel. And only 2-3 chapters after that, you have the first mention of the word war. And it comes in the context of colonization. One king trying to exact his will over several smaller kingdoms, smaller kings. So the thing is, that is the state we are in now. We are in the fallen place. This is what it means to have the fall. The relationships that God declared tov me'od have fallen down with a crash and a thud. And I think that we have to admit and come to terms with the reality that we have crafted a fallen world. We have crafted a world that revolves around a lie, the lie of human hierarchy. And for us, the most salient example of that, the longest term example of that on American soil is the question of race. What is this thing called race? What is it? It is a hierarchy of human belonging, a hierarchy of whether or not someone is created to exercise dominion on land. And it goes all the way back to Plato. Because you see, Plato in 360 BC, he wrote something called the Republic. And in the Republic, he pontificated about how the polis should live together, about how society should work. And what he said was, there's this thing called race. And race is the various metals that people are made of. Yes, he did. He said that. Some people are made of gold, others are made of silver, others are made of copper and tin, and whatever you're made of determines how you will serve the polis, how you will serve society. Okay, it's debatable about whether or not that was a hierarchy at that point, but it did not take long before his student, Aristotle, did create a hierarchy. Aristotle, 10 years later, created the hierarchy called Western supremacy. Aristotle coined that term, Western supremacy. And it was according to Aristotle's belief, and also most of the philosophers of his day. When they thought of a human being, what they would have thought of was someone who was white, someone who was male, and someone who was able-bodied. That's what it meant to be human to Aristotle. He got his stuff directly from Plato. That's Aristotle. Flash forward to 1454, 1452, 1454, 1456, depending on what you're reading. You have Pope Nicholas V. Pope Nicholas V passes something called the Romanus Pontifex. It's now what we call the doctrine of discovery. An explorer came to the Pope and said, "Yo, Pope," remember everybody's from Philly, "Yo, Pope, I want to go exploring and I need a blessing." And the Pope said, "Hey, I'll give you a blessing, and I'll even do you one better. If you come across land that's not civilized, then you have the right to claim that land for the crown." And remember, there is no separation of church and state. So the crown was also the church, right? So you get to claim that land. Oh, and by the way, you also get to enslave the people. Hey, so from that point forward, that was the beginning of the, quote, age of discovery that became the age of colonization and enslavement. And flash forward from there and you get Carl Linnaeus. Carl Linnaeus was a botanist. About 300 years after the Pope made that proclamation in the middle of the transatlantic slave trade, really around the high point of the transatlantic slave trade, around 1767. Carl Linnaeus has been hard at work creating things like a taxonomy, right? The kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Remember that from 7th grade science? I remember that's when I learned that. Mr. Williams was amazing. That's why I still remember that. Well, Carl Linnaeus got a bright idea. He said, well, if it works with fauna, certainly it should work with humanity. Let's try it. So he put himself on top, people who look like him. And then under him, and he called them white Europeanus. Very scientific, right? Underneath him, he put red Americanus. And underneath red Americanus, he put yellow Asiaticus. And under yellow Asiaticus, he put black Africanus. And that was the bottom. That was 1767. 1776, we declared our War of Independence. And 1787, so it only took 20 years to go from this to this, the Three-Fifths Compromise. And the Three-Fifths Compromise, it's now codified into law, into constitutional law, that people of African descent are only worth 3/5 of a human being. And that is only so that they can be counted to gerrymander the Congress for the very first time, the very first Congress, to give more representation to people in the South to even it out between North and South, because the South was dominated by Black people who did not get the vote. They were not considered citizens. 3 years pass by and you get the very first census. And on that census, you can see that people of African descent are not even human beings. We are now chattel. The only racial group mentioned on this first census is white. So I love when people of European descent say, I don't have a race, I don't have an ethnicity. No, actually, all race revolves around your race. Literally, yours was the first one declared by law, and then Blackness came a little bit later. Well, that same year, you get the Immigration Act of 1790 that declares that only people who are white and male, which we mentioned earlier, can become naturalized citizens in the world. So friends, we have to come to terms with the fact that we have crafted a world according to the hierarchies of human belonging. We have crafted the world according to a lie, because we know that the first page of the Bible tells us that all humanity was made in the image of God and called to exercise stewardship of the world, agency to shape the world. What if when we exercise the kind of politics that removes or eradicates or twists or mangles or exploits or excludes any people or people group, what if when we do that, we are also removing, covering up, exploiting, twisting, crushing, erasing the image of God on earth? Consider this. The ancients, when they talked about the image of the king, they understood that image, like we said earlier, to be a marker of where the king rules. And they understood the health of that image to be a marker of the health of the kingdom. I was standing on the stage in South Africa when it struck me. I was speaking on this very topic, and it just struck me for the first time. If you crush the image of God, you are doing something to the kingdom of God. So in the ancient world, when the people thought of the image of the king and they saw healthy images of the king or the royalty, they always understood that, oh, okay, this kingdom is healthy. But where they saw toppled images of the king, where they saw crushed images of the pharaoh, where they saw toppled, crushed, pulverized images of the royalty, that's when they knew there was war against the king happening in that land, either from the inside or the out. What is it going to take, my friends? What is it going to take for us to lay down our arms against God? What is it going to take for us to exercise the kind of politics, the kind of conversations and decisions about how the polis should live together? What is it going to take for us to exercise the kind of politics that protects and serves and cultivates the image of God in all, in every single human being, in every corner of our nation and the world? What will it take? What will it look like? What will it look like? I think I know. I think it will look like the coming of the kingdom of God. It will look like Luke 4, Jesus flipping the text back and saying, I'm here. It's on. The kingdom of God. I have been anointed to preach good news to the poor, to the oppressed, to set the oppressed free. It will look like the first chapter of Luke, when the writer of Luke sets up this epic battle, saying, in the days of King Herod, in the days of a despot, in the days of a man who would kill his own family to maintain power, in those days, the king of the kingdom of God was born into the world. And here you see the face-off between the kingdom of God and the kingdoms of men. And it'll look like Ephesians 2, where the wall of hostility is broken down. And it'll look like Acts 2, where we see the confusion of languages that happens at the Tower of Babel is now reversed. And now we have the entrance of all of these colonized people who were not allowed to speak their own languages, now speaking the languages of the mother tongues of colonized nations, and each of them understanding each other, the loosing of the colonized tongue. It will look like the list of people that Paul thanks at the end of Romans, when Paul thanks women like Junia, who is named an apostle. It will look like Galatians 3, 27 to 29, when Paul says, as many of you as were baptized into Christ have clothed yourselves with Christ. There is no longer Jew or Greek. There is no longer slave or free. There is no longer male or female, for all of you are one in Christ Jesus. It will look like, you see, Paul, I don't think what he was saying is that there is literally no longer Jewish people and Gentile people. There's no longer females and males. That's not what Paul was saying. What Paul, I believe, was saying was, before you go under the water, before you're baptized, you see people through the lenses of empire. You see each other through the hierarchies of human belonging that were rampant at that time and have been ever since. But after you go under the water, when you come up, all you see is the image of God in the other. All you see is their divine call to exercise dominion in the world as a human being. So, friends, there's a fourth word. It's an important word. It's the word demuth. This word demuth is the word likeness in our Genesis text. It is, we are made in God's image and likeness. And that word demuth, if you split the hair, what it really is saying is that we are like God, but we are not God. It actually is meant to distinguish us from God. And so, I think that the prophetic word to people of color, people who have been colonized, people who have been exploited, to women, to people in the LGBTQ community, to all humanity who has experienced the subjugation of the other. And actually, that is every last one of us at some point. If you go far enough back, pre-colonization, you can see the colonization of countries in Europe. You can see the domination of some over others. And I think we need to get that memory back. We need to reach back and remember that we too were once colonized, were once dominated. And God wants that for no one. But that word demuth, it sits next to the word shalom in the text, image and likeness. And I think that that word shalom is the prophetic word to people of color, the prophetic word to women, the prophetic word to those who've been pushed to the margins, because it says to them, it says to us, rise, stand full in the image of God that is inside of you. You too were created to exercise dominion in the world. It is that truth that filled the people of the civil rights movement. It is that truth that caused people of African descent to escape from enslavement by the thousands. It is that truth that causes every movement that we've ever seen, the suffrage movement, the labor union movement, the civil rights movement, the environmental justice movement, the LGBTQ movement. All of these movements, all they really are is a demand for the shalom of God inside of them to be seen and recognized by the law. And then the second word, this demuth, I believe is a prophetic word today for people of European descent, in particular in the United States of America, and really of all colonized nations that were colonized by European nations. Because it was in that colonizing project through the laws that we just reviewed that there was an attempt to isolate the self as the only ones created in the image of God. And in the doing, I believe, there was a struggle against God. There was a crushing of the image of God. There was a struggle for God, with God, for supremacy, the ability to name people and have that be their name, the ability to declare what is true and have that be true, even if it's not. To say that somebody is only 3/5 of a human being, and then they are according to the law. Only God should be able to declare what someone is, who is human and who is not. But people of European descent have claimed that right and have claimed the right, the exclusive right to exercise dominion here. And when we look at all of the craziness that's happening in our world right now, it really traces back to the reality that this world is shifting, and it is no longer assumed that people of European descent are the ones called by God to exercise exclusive dominion on this land. So I think in order for us to begin to heal our land, we need to be able to see the image of God in the other. We need to be able to see and reckon with and embrace the call of God on all humanity to steward this world. To close, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to ask us just to look at the people on the screen here. And I want you to look into the eyes or imagine someone who is not like you. If you're male, they're not male. If you're a woman, they're not a woman. If you are a person of European descent, they're not of European descent. And I want you to imagine their eyes. I want you to look into the eyes of someone on the screen, or if you need to use your imagination, use your imagination. Now I want you to look beyond their eyes. Look beyond the eyes. On the other side of the eyes, look for the image of God. On the other side of their eyes. And when you see it, in your living room or kitchen or in your room, wherever you are, your den, wherever you're listening or watching, when you're ready, repeat after me when you see the image of God in the other. Say, I see. The image of God in you. Amen.
Lisa Sharon Harper. I'm Carol Thorane, and I have the privilege of having a conversation with you.
Wonderful. Thank you.
So we are all beggars, and
Mhm.
you are providing food for us.
Mm.
And it is so rich, and there is so much here to inquire about. I personally am going to ask you a few things, and then there's some questions from our larger audience. But I'm wondering if you could comment on the fact that we individually, many of us don't know how to feel beloved, and looking for how we can get from kind of an individualistic orientation to looking for those between spaces where all those connections are.
Yes.
If we can't find the image, see the image of God in ourselves. Because I'm wondering, how the church got to the place where it was only about personal salvation and the great beyond, and not the kingdom of God right now, what that might look like. So I'm just wondering if, I know that's a very basic thing, but
This is good.
yeah.
This is actually a very deep question. And my mind is going a thousand places right now. I'm trying to, which one to choose. I think that where I'll start with the question of belovedness. The fall, what the fall was disconnection. That's what the fall did. It disconnected us from each other. That's the character of the fall, is disconnectedness. And one of the things we got disconnected from was ourselves. And another was God. So imagine if you are connected, if you're connected to God, if you're connected to in John, I think it's John, who says, God is love. God is love. You are connected to love. Then you can't help but know you're beloved. If you are connected to love, which is the force of the universe, it is the creative force of the universe, of the world. Love is what binds us together. It is the connection between all things. It is ultimately, truly, all actually about love. It really is. So if you can't feel beloved, if you can't access your belovedness, most likely you have been traumatized in some way. Most likely you have not experienced your belovedness, maybe because of a dysfunctional family, maybe because you were bullied, maybe because there's lots of different reasons, maybe because you've done some pretty bad things. You have hurt others. But usually when we hurt others, it's because we've been hurt. Hurt people, right? When we go back, even in history, when we look at slavery and how it started from nations that had been hurt, who had been dominated. It started in the context of an imperial age.
So if we're a people, which we are, as you talked about your pilgrimage, the Trail of Tears and our own history of slavery, what is your advice to us how we can acknowledge, not avoid that, not deny that, because that is a very difficult conversation that people are trying to have right now, so that we can all rise together. And that gets to additional questions about how we create those bridges and start feeling those connections. Because I think you're right, when we feel connected to one another and God in a spiritual way, we do then see our own likeness when we
Yeah.
see the likeness in another. But do you have advice for us about what it will take? Because we have a lot of active denial and fear and
Mhm.
um, avoidance of our own history.
Yes, yes, yes. So, at the heart of shalom, as I said in the very beginning, is truth telling. It is reciprocity. It is reparation. It's
Mm.
actually a biblical concept. It is restitution. It is all that it takes to make things as they should be, to repair what domination broke in the world and breaks in the world. My next book, I'm literally 2 chapters from the end of writing this book. I'm so excited. Whoa, I can't wait. I can't wait for you guys to read. It's going to be good. It really is. I'm doing a ton of family research because what I decided to do was to go back, not just into the history that I'm taught in the history books, but to learn my family's history and to do everything I could to figure out my family's history so that I could begin to try to understand, how did race break my family? And through the framework of my family, which is this really diverse family from literally, and it's amazing, my family has been on this land called the United States of America and the colonies since 1682 at least, right? So we literally have experienced most of the major moments in American history, and they've impacted our lives and have changed the course of our futures and generations. And so how do we repair? I think we have to ask a very basic question, and we're going to be getting into this tomorrow, so I don't want to take too much thunder here. But I will say that, how do we do it? We begin by asking, how do we break it? And that's why
Mm.
truth telling and truth listening and truth seeking is so important. And honestly, that's why this last 4 years has been so destructive to our democracy, because we have allowed truth to be put on trial itself. We have allowed there to be a question about whether or not truth matters at all.
Mm.
And the ones who say we follow Jesus, who said, I am the truth, we have accepted lies that we know are lies. And we've not held our leaders accountable for the lies that they have told. And because of that, confusion enters in. That's why Paul lists lying as one of a handful of sins that will get somebody put into hell. Isn't that deep? Paul actually literally lists this handful of sins, and one of them is lying. That it says somebody is worthy of hell for lying. Why? Because lies sow confusion. And when confusion happens, that's when people are able to be oppressed. And when people are oppressed, what does that mean? It means the image of God is crushed on earth. When we come against the image of God, then we are waging war against the kingdom of God.
So, and I know there are some questions about hierarchy and how we move away from that, and how we move towards a philosophy or a paradigm of abundance rather than lack.
Mhm.
And so, but working with hierarchy, whether it's in our churches or whether it's in our government, the need for one over the other.
Mhm.
And so if you could talk a little bit about that, or how we might work within our churches to model something different.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's funny. I actually have learned a lot from indigenous nations around the world. I think that, part of the problem, quite honestly, is that we have disconnected ourselves from the land itself.
Mm.
We've disconnected ourselves from our own stories, our people's stories, the stories that live on land, right? Again, as a result of this book that I'm writing, I decided to move back into the community where my grandmother and great grandmother lived. So I now live 1 block from where they used to live. And so I am now connected to the land and also where my great grandfather, I'm like literally about a quarter of a mile from a place where my great grandfather owned a whole block of homes in Philadelphia, right? Before it was taken by eminent domain. So stories rise from the land. So when you are disconnected from the land, you become disconnected people. So, oh my goodness, there's so much. So when we talk tomorrow, we're going to talk a little bit more about race.
Okay.
We're going to talk a little bit more about how race, the creation of whiteness, okay, was an act of disconnection from the European story. And as a result, from the European self. So now, when you come to America and you say, you have a choice, you can remain Lithuanian or you can be white. In order to be white, you have to renounce your Lithuanian heritage. You got to talk like us, eat like us, be like us, wear your hair like us, get rid of that accent, right? When you do that and you say yes to that, what identity are you taking on? The only identity you're taking on now is a racial identity. It's called white. And you know what that identity exists to do? It exists to do one thing and one thing only. It exists to determine who can exercise dominion on land. So when your identity becomes connected to that question of power, who has dominion, then you get January 6th.
And a climate crisis.
And the climate crisis
right.
and an immigration crisis. And you get all kinds of craziness, actually, because it's disconnected. So what is the remedy? The remedy is to reconnect. The remedy is to reconnect to the land, to reconnect to your own family story, to reconnect to the earth, to plant a garden. I'm very serious about that. I actually really mean this.
Mm-hmm.
This is the remedy, to be reconnected, because that is what shalom is. That was God's desire. This is what God called tov me'od, very good. Be reconnected. And that also means be reconnected to those who are not like you.